Hey there. I know why you're here. You're looking for a story that will help you drift off into a peaceful sleep. Something calming, a little mysterious. Something that carries your mind away. Well, you've come to the right place. Before we begin tonight's journey, do me a little favor. Tap the like button, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below. Even just a good night. It really helps more sleepy souls like you find their way here. Now, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let's begin tonight's story. They say saving a life is the noblest thing a person can do. But what if saving someone means sacrificing yourself? It started the night. I pulled a drowning man from the river. He was cold, trembling, and his voice barely a whisper as he clung to me. "They'll come for you," he said. I thought he was delirious until the knocking began. First at my front door, then at my windows, always slow, always deliberate, and no one was ever there. Now I can't tell if I'm awake or trapped in something else. Every shadow feels alive. Every sound feels like a warning. The man I saved is nowhere to be found, but I hear his voice in the dark, and every night the knocking grows louder, closer. Whatever I pulled from the water, it didn't stay there. I never intended to be there that evening. I'd walked that path beside the river 100 times before, but that night it felt different, quieter, heavier somehow. The air smelled faintly of wet earth and decaying leaves, and there was an unsettling stillness to the water, like it was holding its breath. The shortcut home had always been a comfort after long days, yet every step felt like I was moving further into something I didn't understand. My shoes crunched on gravel, the sound sharp in the silence, and for reasons I couldn't explain, I slowed my pace. The street lamps lining the path flickered weakly, as though unsure they wanted to stay lit. That's when I heard it, a faint splash. A noise so subtle it could have been anything. A bird, a fish, or just the river shifting. But then it came again, louder this time. A sound that didn't belong. A struggle, a gasp. My heart stuttered. I froze, listening hard. The river was a black ribbon under the dim light, its surface deceptively calm. But somewhere in that darkness, I heard it again, a desperate cry, muffled and wet. Without thinking, I stepped closer to the edge, peering into the murk. My chest tightened as I spotted movement, an arm, pale and thrashing weakly before disappearing under the surface. Panic surged through me, sharp and electric. My instincts screamed to call for help, but my phone was buried deep in my bag, and there was no one else on the path. The sound came again, gurgling and frantic. There wasn't time to think. I kicked off my shoes, tore my coat from my shoulders, and dropped my bag so carelessly it slid into the mud. The cold bit into my legs as I waded into the river, its icy grip seizing my muscles. The current was stronger than I anticipated, tugging at my clothes, trying to pull me under too. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I pushed forward, my eyes straining in the half-light to track his movements. He was slipping further out of reach, his flailing growing weaker with every second. I forced myself through the water, legs burning, until my fingers brushed against him. His skin was slick, unnaturally cold. I grabbed hold of his arm and hauled with all the strength I had, the river resisting with a will of its own. He coughed violently as his head broke the surface, sputtering and gasping, his hands clawing feebly at my shoulder. His weight was staggering, and for a terrifying moment, I thought we'd both go under. But somehow, inch by inch, I dragged us back to the shore until we collapsed in the shallow mud. both of us shivering and gasping. He lay on his back, chest heaving, water streaming from his hair into the dirt. His eyes, wide, glassy, and too dark, locked onto mine. I opened my mouth to speak, but the words died in my throat when he whispered, barely audible, over the lapping water, "They'll come for you." The words froze me in place. There was no confusion in his tone, no pleading. It was a flat, resigned statement, and it sank into my chest like ice. "What? Who?" I asked, my voice shaking as much as my hands. But his gaze didn't waver. He didn't blink. He just kept staring as his breathing grew shallow, then stopped altogether. My stomach lurched violently. I dropped to my knees beside him, pressing my fingers to his neck. No pulse, no rise of his chest. "No, no, no, stay with me," I shouted, shaking his shoulder, but there was nothing. And then, he wasn't there. 1 second my hands were clutching his slick, cold skin, and the next, they grasped only wet mud. I blinked, my breath catching painfully. I scrambled back, scanning the shoreline, the river, the trees. The bank was empty. The water was still. The only sign of struggle was my coat floating a few feet away, and a set of footprints, 2 sets, side by side, leading from the river into nothing. My mind reeled. Had I imagined it all? Was I in shock? But my clothes were soaked to the skin. My hands trembled violently. And as I staggered to my feet, the air seemed to hum with a strange, oppressive weight, like the river itself was watching me. By the time I made it home, my teeth were chattering so hard, I thought they might break. I peeled off my wet clothes, dropped them in a heap on the floor, and stood under the shower until my skin turned raw from the heat. But no amount of water could wash away the feeling that clung to me, that his eyes were still staring, somewhere just beyond my vision, that his words were echoing, not in my ears but deep in my head. "They'll come for you." I climbed into bed, hours later, exhaustion dragging at my bones, but sleep wouldn't come. Every creak of the house made my heart leap. At some point, I must have dozed off, because when I awoke, it was to a sound I couldn't immediately place. A faint tapping, 3 soft, deliberate knocks. The knocking didn't stop. It came again, 3 deliberate, echoing strikes against the wood. I sat rigid on the edge of my bed, staring into the dark room, my ears strained to catch every sound, my heart thundering so loud, I thought it would drown everything else out. The digital clock's red glow read 2:43 a.m. It wasn't the first time I'd woken suddenly, but this felt different. This wasn't a dream, wasn't sleep paralysis. This was real. I waited. The house held its breath. Then came another series of knocks. Louder this time, but still slow. Whoever was out there wasn't in a hurry. I didn't move. For a moment I even stopped breathing, as if somehow staying silent would make me invisible. I told myself it was nothing, that maybe I hadn't even heard it. But the sound came again, each knock resonating through the walls like a heartbeat. My hands trembled as I pushed the blanket aside and set my feet on the cold floor. The air in the room felt wrong, too heavy, too damp. My bare soles stuck slightly to the wooden boards as I moved toward the hallway. The floor creaked under my weight, and I flinched. At the end of the hall, faint light from the street lamp outside fell across the front door. I paused, heart pounding, and stared at it. Another 3 knocks. I crept closer, my breath shallow. I forced myself to peek through the peephole, expecting to see a face, a shadow, something. But there was nothing. The porch was empty, the faint glow of the streetlight showing, only still air and wet pavement. I stepped back, unsure what to do. That's when I heard it again. 3 knocks. But this time they came from the back door. My stomach dropped. I turned slowly, staring toward the kitchen. The sound was muffled but unmistakable. Slow, deliberate strikes against the glass. I didn't move. My chest ached with the effort to stay quiet, every muscle in my body screaming to run or hide. But I couldn't bring myself to do either. The knocks stopped suddenly, replaced by silence, so deep it pressed against my ears. Then came a new sound, soft, wet dragging. It started faintly, somewhere near the kitchen, the noise of something heavy and damp sliding across the floorboards. It wasn't footsteps. It was slower, like bare feet leaving trails of water as they moved. My throat tightened. The sound drew closer, inching through the house. I backed toward my room, my hand fumbling for the door handle. I slipped inside and pressed the door shut until it clicked. I didn't turn on the light. I just stood there in the dark, straining to hear. The dragging stopped. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I waited, my back against the door, every muscle tense. Time seemed to stretch and bend. Minutes passed, maybe hours. Finally, faint light crept through the curtains as dawn arrived. I didn't sleep again. When I finally gathered the courage to leave my room, the house looked the same as always, too normal. The front door was still locked, the back door too. There were no signs of forced entry, no wet footprints on the floor. My mind began to rationalize. Stress, exhaustion, maybe a dream. But then I saw it. Lying on the welcome mat outside the front door was a single bare footprint. It was wet, perfectly formed, toes pointing inward, as if whoever or whatever had been standing there was facing me. I backed away, heart hammering, and shut the door. I checked the locks 3 times, but it didn't help. The image of that print was burned into my mind. It wasn't muddy, wasn't distorted. It was clean, as though it had been pressed there moments ago. But the air was dry. There hadn't been rain for days. All day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even in broad daylight, I jumped at every sound. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the floorboards, the faint rustle of wind through the trees outside. Each noise set my nerves on edge. I tried to distract myself, turning on the TV, scrolling mindlessly through my phone. But every so often, I caught myself glancing at the doors and windows, half expecting to see a pale face staring in. When night fell, the unease deepened. Shadows seemed thicker, heavier, like they clung to the walls. I double-checked every lock before retreating to my room, but it didn't matter, because just past midnight, the knocking returned. The knocking didn't sound hesitant anymore. It was bolder now. 3 slow, measured strikes that seemed to echo through every corner of the house. I sat up in bed, my body stiff from lying still too long, my ears straining in the darkness. The clock read 12:18 a.m. I hadn't even drifted fully to sleep this time. The sound had been waiting for me. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders, as if the thin fabric could shield me. Again 3 knocks. This time from the living room wall. My breath caught. Walls don't knock. I told myself it was the pipes, the old house settling. But deep down, I knew better. These knocks weren't random creaks or groans. They were too slow, too deliberate. I pressed a hand over my mouth to stifle the sound of my breathing. Then came a new sound, a soft, wet slap against the floorboards. It started faintly, almost imperceptible, a dragging, shuffling sound like someone walking barefoot across a wet surface. I pictured water pooling beneath each step, dark stains soaking into the wood. The sound moved closer, slow but purposeful, creeping from the living room toward the hallway. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing it to stop, but the sound continued, a steady rhythm that seemed to match my heartbeat. When it reached the hallway outside my bedroom, I thought I could hear breathing, shallow, ragged, too close to be my own. Then 3 knocks, this time on my bedroom door. I froze, barely daring to inhale. The knocking was softer now, almost gentle, as if whatever was outside didn't want to frighten me, at least not yet. My fingers dug into the blanket, knuckles aching. I wanted to call for help, but my phone lay on the nightstand inches away, and I couldn't bring myself to reach for it. The fear felt physical, pinning me in place. The knocks stopped. Silence settled over the house again, but it wasn't comforting. It felt heavy, oppressive, like the air itself was holding its breath. I stayed awake until the first grey light of dawn seeped through the curtains, too afraid to move. When I finally opened the bedroom door, my heart pounding, the house appeared as it always did. Sunlight streamed in through the kitchen window. Birds chirped outside. The only thing out of place was the faint smell of river water, earthy and metallic, clinging stubbornly to the air. But then I saw the floor, trailing from the front door, across the living room, and stopping just outside my bedroom door, were wet footprints, bare, each one perfectly formed, as if someone had walked through the house dripping water onto the floorboards. I stared at the footprints for a long time, my stomach twisting tighter with every passing second. They were impossible, perfectly shaped. Each toe distinct, trailing across the wooden floor like a trail of breadcrumbs. I followed them with my eyes, from the front door to the living room, across the hall, and stopping just outside my bedroom. My breath came shallow and fast. I hadn't heard anyone enter. The locks were still bolted, but the prints were fresh, glistening faintly, as if they'd been made minutes ago. I backed away, my heel catching the edge of a rug, nearly sending me sprawling. The air in the house felt damp, heavy with the faint smell of river mud. It clung to my clothes, my skin, even my hair. I wanted to tell myself it was my imagination, that I was seeing things after a restless night, but I knew better. The prints were real. I could feel it in my bones. That night, I didn't bother getting into bed. I stayed in the living room with every light on, clutching a kitchen knife. I wasn't sure I had the courage to use. Midnight came and went in suffocating silence. I almost convinced myself it was over, that whatever had visited was done with me. But at 2:17 a.m., the knocking returned. This time it didn't start at the front door. The first 3 knocks came from the ceiling directly above me. I froze, staring upward as my mind scrambled for answers. Attic. There wasn't one. Not in this house. My pulse thundered in my ears. Another 3 knocks, harder now. The light fixture above me rattled with the vibration. I gripped the knife tighter, my palms slick with sweat. Then came the sound of movement. Soft, deliberate steps pacing above, followed by the faintest sound of dripping water. Each step creaked in slow succession, as if whoever, or whatever, it was didn't care if I heard them. My eyes darted toward the front door, but I couldn't make my body move. The steps stopped. 3 more knocks, this time from the wall directly behind me. I spun around, my back pressed to the couch. The sound was closer now. So close I swore I could hear shallow breathing through the dry wall. My throat felt tight, my chest rising and falling in rapid, shallow bursts. Another knock, this time from the window. The curtains swayed slightly, as if disturbed by a breeze. I hadn't opened a window in weeks. When lightning flashed outside, I caught a glimpse of a figure, tall, pale, dripping wet, standing beyond the glass. Its face was indistinct, blurred like something submerged underwater. My breath hitched. I blinked, and the figure was gone. But the knocks continued, faster now, harder, coming from every direction at once. The front door, the windows, the walls, even the floor beneath me. It was a steady rhythm, like 100 fists pounding in unison. I pressed my hands over my ears, my body trembling violently. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the knocking stopped. The house fell into a silence so complete, it felt unnatural. My own ragged breathing was the only sound. But then I heard it, a whisper, so close it felt like it came from inside my own head. "They'll come for you." The whisper didn't leave me. Even in the daylight, I could hear it faintly, lingering like the echo of a nightmare I couldn't shake. "They'll come for you." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They pulsed in the back of my mind like a heartbeat, waiting for quiet moments to surface. That morning, I sat at the kitchen table, gripping a mug of cold coffee, staring at the front door as if it might come alive. Every so often, I thought I heard faint knocking, too soft to be certain, too steady to ignore. I told myself it was nothing. But then I noticed the condensation on the glass of the back door, a single handprint pressed against it from the outside. It hadn't been there the night before. I didn't call anyone. Who would I call? What would I even say? That a man I pulled from a river whispered a threat and vanished into thin air. That my house was being haunted by knocking and wet footprints. No one would believe me, and I wasn't sure I believed it myself. I spent the afternoon pacing the house, checking locks, pulling curtains tight, yet no matter how much I tried to busy myself, I couldn't shake the growing sense of being watched. Even with all the blinds closed, I swore I felt eyes on me from somewhere just out of sight. By evening, the tension was unbearable. I'd tried leaving the TV on for noise, but the voices from it blended too easily with the ones whispering faintly in the walls. At first, they sounded like murmurs, indistinct, like water swirling in a drain. But as the sun sank and shadows deepened, the voices sharpened. I couldn't understand the words, but they carried the cadence of conversation, urgent, hushed. Sometimes it felt like they were laughing quietly. Sometimes it sounded like crying. At 11:47 p.m., the first knock came. 3 measured strikes against the wall beside the couch. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. Then came 3 more, this time from the ceiling. My breath quickened. I wanted to run but couldn't make my legs work. The knocking shifted again, now from the floor beneath my feet. It felt like the whole house was alive, pulsing with the sound. I grabbed the kitchen knife again, though I didn't know what good it would do. I backed into the hallway, scanning every doorway, every shadow. That's when I heard the wet dragging sound again. This time it wasn't faint. It was loud, deliberate, coming from the direction of my bedroom. Each step left a sticky sound, like bare feet lifting from a wet surface. And then I heard it, my own voice, whispering from the bedroom, "They'll come for you." The sound of my own voice coming from the bedroom made my blood run cold. It wasn't a recording, it wasn't an echo, it was me, my exact tone, my exact cadence, whispering those same 4 words again. "They'll come for you." I pressed my back to the hallway wall, gripping the knife tighter, my palms slick with sweat. I wanted to believe it was a trick of my mind, stress twisting reality out of shape. But the voice spoke again, louder this time, more insistent. They'll come for you. They'll come for you. It was no longer a whisper, it was almost a chant. I forced myself toward the bedroom, every step slow and cautious. The door stood ajar, and the air beyond it felt colder somehow, like stepping into a walk-in freezer. My breath misted in front of me. I nudged the door with the tip of the knife, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. The voice fell silent the moment the door creaked open. The room looked normal at first glance. Bed unmade, curtains drawn, but the smell hit me. Muddy, metallic, damp, the same scent that had clung to the river that night. And then I saw them, footprints, dozens of them, bare and wet, stamped across the floor, up the walls, even streaked across the ceiling, in impossible directions. They circled the bed, led to the closet, then stopped abruptly, as if whatever made them had vanished, mid-step. I swallowed hard, my throat dry and raw. A soft sound rose from the closet, a slow, steady knocking. 3 beats, pause, 3 more. I didn't want to look. Every instinct screamed at me to leave the house, to run and never stop. But something stronger, a terrible, morbid curiosity, pulled me forward. My trembling hand reached for the closet door, fingers brushing the cool metal handle. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed felt alive, heavy with unseen eyes. Then a single wet finger slipped out from the gap between the doors, dragging slowly down the wood. I stumbled back with a choked cry, the knife clattering to the floor. The finger withdrew soundlessly, leaving a long, wet streak. My stomach churned as the voice spoke again from behind the door, low, guttural, no longer in my tone. "We're already here." The words, "We're already here," echoed in my skull. Long after the sound had faded, my body refused to move. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, staring at the closet door, as if expecting it to burst open. The air felt wrong, thicker somehow, like breathing through wet fabric. My skin prickled with goosebumps, and every instinct screamed at me to get out. But my legs felt heavy, leaden. Slowly my eyes drifted to the wet streak the finger had left. It was still glistening, droplets forming at the bottom before sliding down to the floor. Then the knocking began again, not from the closet this time, but from all around me. 3 knocks from the bedroom door, 3 from the window, 3 from beneath the floorboards, each series in perfect rhythm, surrounding me like a slow, relentless heartbeat. My breathing turned ragged as I backed toward the hallway, but with every step, the knocks followed, shifting locations as though the sound itself was moving, stalking me. When I reached the living room, I froze. The walls were pulsing faintly, as if breathing. The sound of whispering returned, not just one voice now, but many, overlapping, tangled together in an unintelligible chorus. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices grew louder, crawling beneath my skin. I thought I caught words, fragments like "join us" and "the river never forgets." My heart raced so violently, it made my vision swim. The knocking suddenly stopped, replaced by a suffocating silence. I lowered my hands cautiously, my ears straining. Then the sound of water dripping echoed through the room. I turned slowly, and my stomach lurched. Water was seeping from the walls, running down in long, thin rivulets. It pooled on the floor, spreading toward my feet with impossible speed. The metallic smell of river mud filled my nostrils, so strong it made me gag. A loud crash from the kitchen made me jump violently. It sounded like every cabinet door slamming open at once. I gripped the wall for support, As I stumbled toward the sound, my feet splashing in the shallow water now covering the floor, my reflection in the glossy surface stared back at me, but something was wrong. The reflection was smiling, and I wasn't. The smile in the reflection didn't move when I did. Its lips curled wider, teeth too many and too sharp, stretching inhumanly until they split the corners of its mouth. I froze, staring down at the watery surface, my own face staring back but no longer mine. Its eyes were black, empty pits that seemed to pull at me, urging me closer. The water rippled as the smile widened again, and though my feet remained rooted to the floor, I felt the sensation of sinking, my body dragged downward into the cold, suffocating depths beneath the reflection. The whispers rose around me, louder now, the voices overlapping in a chorus of distorted laughter and broken words. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs, and with a cry, I wrenched my gaze away. Stumbling back so hard I slammed into the kitchen counter. My breath came in ragged gasps as the laughter echoed in the corners of the room, clinging to the air like a foul odor. The floorboards beneath me groaned, wet and soft like rotting wood. I glanced down, horrified to see my own footprints glowing faintly, as though lit from beneath. They stretched behind me in a perfect trail leading back to the living room, and I realized with a chill that they weren't mine at all. The toes pointed toward me, not away. Whoever, or whatever, had been walking through the house wasn't following me. It had been leading me here. I gripped the edge of the counter until my knuckles whitened, the sharp sting of splinters digging into my palms grounding me for a moment. Then the knocking returned, 3 hard, deliberate strikes against the refrigerator door. My head whipped toward it, and in the dim kitchen light, I saw a single wet handprint sliding down the stainless steel surface. It wasn't large. It was small, child-sized. I stumbled backward, the heel of my foot catching on a loose board as I fell hard against the floor. The whispers grew frenzied, a cacophony now, voices whispering over one another in a language I couldn't understand. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement, a figure darting past the kitchen doorway. I shot to my feet, knife clutched tight, my chest heaving as I scanned the shadows. My entire body screamed to leave the house, to run into the street barefoot if I had to, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Something unseen held me there like a puppet on strings, every muscle locked in place. My reflection still lingered in the water, pooling on the floor, its smile receding, its black eyes blinking once, slow and deliberate, before it whispered in my own voice, "You let him in." A sudden chill swept over me, the air turning so cold I could see my breath, fogging in front of my face. The kitchen lights flickered, buzzing loudly before they went out completely, plunging the house into darkness. I stood frozen in the pitch black, knife trembling in my grip, as the only sounds were my ragged breathing and the faint, wet squelch of footsteps circling the room. I couldn't tell how many there were, 2 sets, 3, maybe more. They shuffled slowly, each step deliberate, as if savoring my terror. The smell of river water was overwhelming now, thick and choking, coating my tongue with its metallic taste. Then a new sound joined the chorus, a low guttural humming, the same tune over and over, childlike, almost playful. The humming grew louder, closer. It moved in circles around me, and for a moment I swore. I felt icy fingers brush against the back of my neck. My legs finally unlocked, and I bolted toward the hallway, slipping on the wet floor and catching myself on the wall. My feet splashed through the water,
each step accompanied by soft giggles from the shadows. As I reached the living room, I slammed into something solid yet cold as ice. I stumbled back and looked up. A figure stood in the doorway, impossibly tall, its body draped in soaked, tattered fabric that clung to its skeletal frame. Its face, or what remained of it, was featureless, except for a wide slit of a mouth that stretched ear to ear. It didn't move. It didn't need to. The knocking returned all at once, from the walls, the floor, the ceiling, a deafening symphony of fists pounding in perfect rhythm, shaking the very foundation of the house. I pressed my hands to my ears and screamed, but the sound only grew louder. The figure in the doorway raised one long dripping arm. Its fingers splayed wide as it pointed toward me. Behind it, more figures emerged from the shadows, small ones, child-sized, their heads lolling at impossible angles, their feet leaving wet prints as they shuffled forward. My back hit the far wall, nowhere to run. The laughter and humming merged into a single discordant note that rattled my skull. And then, silence. In that silence, the voice spoke again, this time not a whisper but a low guttural growl from every corner of the room. You saved what was ours, now we take what's yours.
The words echoed through the room like a physical force, each syllable vibrating in my chest, as if spoken directly into my bones. You saved what was ours. Now we take what's yours. I wanted to scream, to tell them I didn't understand, but my throat locked up, no sound escaping. The figures stood motionless in the dim light, their dripping forms painting the floor with spreading pools of water. The tall one's arm remained extended, finger pointing as if sealing my fate. My mind raced, grasping at reason. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. But the cold seeping up through my feet from the water on the floor said otherwise. Then, in unison, the smaller figures tilted their heads to the side, a grotesque parody of curiosity. The sound of bones cracking filled the silence as their necks bent at impossible angles. One of them took a step forward, water squelching beneath its foot. Panic surged through me like an electric current, snapping my paralysis. I bolted for the stairs, slipping on the slick boards but catching myself before I fell. Behind me, the humming returned, soft at first but growing louder with each hurried step. It wasn't one voice anymore. It was a chorus. High-pitched, childlike voices humming that same nauseating tune over and over, their tones distorted like broken music boxes. I took the steps 2 at a time, my bare feet leaving their own wet prints behind. When I reached the top, I didn't hesitate. I ran to the bathroom, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My chest heaved with frantic breaths as I pressed my back against the cold tile wall. The humming continued below, drifting up the stairs in waves. Then came the knocking. 3 hard strikes on the bathroom door. Pause, then 3 more. I clapped my hands over my ears, trying to drown it out, but the knocking only grew louder, harder, until the door rattled in its frame. The voices rose again, not whispers now, but full-throated, guttural chants in a language I couldn't recognize. The words seemed to coil around me like snakes, their meaning lost, but their intent unmistakable. I backed into the farthest corner, curling my knees to my chest, knife clutched uselessly in one shaking hand. My reflection in the bathroom mirror caught my eye, and I wished I hadn't looked. It wasn't following my movements. Its face was gaunt, hollow-eyed, lips moving silently, as though reciting the chants from outside. Then it stopped, tilting its head with an expression of sick delight, before mouthing, "Let us in." The lights flickered violently overhead, plunging the room into stuttering darkness. Every flicker revealed something new in the mirror, shapes standing behind me, too many to count. In one flash, I saw a pale hand pressed against the glass from the other side, its fingers long and webbed, like they had been stretched too far. In another, I saw a childlike figure with hollow sockets where its eyes should have been, its mouth hanging open as water poured endlessly from it, spilling down its chest and pooling on the tiled floor. Each flash made the room feel smaller, tighter, as though the walls themselves were closing in. The knocking stopped suddenly, replaced by a slow scraping sound. Something was dragging sharp nails down the door from top to bottom, over and over, carving deep grooves into the wood. I held my breath, too terrified to move. Then, without warning, the chanting ceased. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I stayed still for what felt like hours, every muscle locked in place, straining to hear any hint of movement. When I finally dared to shift, the silence broke. From right above me, a single drop of water landed on my shoulder. I didn't want to look. I couldn't, but my body betrayed me, my head tilting upward to meet the inevitable. The ceiling was cracked open like a rotten egg, long, pale fingers gripping the edges of the hole as something began to pull itself through. Its skin hung in tatters, water streaming endlessly from its open wounds, eyes black as the river at midnight. Its smile stretched unnaturally wide, as it whispered in a voice layered with hundreds of others, "You should have let him drown." I couldn't scream. The sound caught in my throat, strangled by the sheer weight of terror pressing down on me. The figure hanging from the ceiling grinned wider, its mouth splitting far beyond what should be humanly possible, jagged teeth glistening with river water. Droplets fell from its outstretched fingers, landing on my face and soaking my hair as they hissed against the cold tile. I pressed myself tighter into the corner, shaking violently as it began to descend, its body impossibly long, bending and twisting like it had no bones. The whispers returned, louder now, coming not just from the walls but from inside my own head, overlapping until they became a deafening chorus of accusations. "You shouldn't have pulled him out. You shouldn't have touched him. You shouldn't have saved him." The words tangled together, each one sharper than a knife. The creature's fingers brushed the floor, sending ripples through the shallow water that now covered every inch of the bathroom. Its head tilted at an unnatural angle, and though its hollow eyes had no pupils, I felt its gaze pierce straight through me. The knife slipped from my trembling fingers, clattering uselessly to the tiles as I pulled my knees tighter to my chest. I tried to shut my eyes, to block it out, but even in the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw it, saw dozens of them, faces bloated and waterlogged, their mouths open in silent screams. "We were waiting for him," the chorus hissed. "You stole him from us. Now we'll take you instead." The air thickened until each breath felt like drowning. The figure let go of the ceiling and dropped into the water with a wet, sickening thud that sent waves splashing against my skin. I flinched violently as it rose to its full height, impossibly tall in the cramped room, its head nearly brushing the flickering light fixture. It stepped closer, each movement jerky and unnatural, water cascading from its ruined flesh. Its mouth didn't move, but the voices screamed louder, the sound reverberating through my skull until I thought my head would split in two. I clamped my hands over my ears, sobbing now, tears mingling with the cold river water running down my cheeks. My entire body felt numb, as if the water wasn't just soaking me but seeping into my veins. Suddenly, The door to the bathroom shuddered violently. Something on the other side was pounding against it. 3 heavy knocks. Pause. Then 3 more, louder this time. The figure before me froze, its head snapping toward the sound with an almost predatory stillness. The pounding escalated into a rapid, frenzied assault, as though dozens of fists were hammering against the wood all at once. The walls shook. The mirror cracked down the middle, sending jagged splinters of glass raining into the water. I pressed my back harder against the tile, my nails digging into the grout as the creature slowly turned back toward me. Its grin never wavered. The voices hissed louder, their words blurring into a single venomous chant. Drown, drown, drown. My lungs ached, each breath a struggle, as if I was submerged beneath the river's surface all over again. I gasped for air, but the room felt like it was filling with water, the floor rising to my chest, then my neck. I thrashed instinctively, though I knew it wasn't real. It couldn't be real, yet my mouth filled with the metallic tang of river water as I coughed and sputtered. The creature stepped closer, its long fingers reaching for my face. Then, abruptly, the pounding on the door stopped. The voices fell silent in unison, leaving a vacuum of sound so absolute it made my ears ring. The figure froze mid-reach. The only sound left was the soft dripping of water from its fingers. Slowly, it began to withdraw, its body melting backward into the darkness like ink spreading through water. I gasped, my lungs burning as I coughed up, mouthfuls of icy fluid, clawing desperately at the air. The temperature of the room began to rise, the water receding, leaving only slick tiles and the faint stench of mildew. My ears still rang with the echo of the chant, but the house was quiet again, too quiet. When I finally dared to move, I crawled toward the door, my soaked clothes heavy against my trembling limbs. My hand shook violently as I reached for the lock. I half expected the creature's hand to shoot out from the drain and drag me back into the darkness, but nothing happened. The door creaked open into the dim hallway beyond. Water dripped from my hair onto the floorboards, leaving dark stains behind. The house felt empty now, eerily so, but deep down, I knew it wasn't over. The sound of the lock clicking open echoed like a gunshot through the house. My breath caught in my throat as I stumbled backward, eyes darting between the front door and the small figure at the base of the stairs. Its pale hand still pointed toward the entrance, a silent command I didn't dare defy. The door creaked, slow and deliberate, as a cold draft swept in, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of river mud and decay. I wanted to scream, to slam the door shut, to run as fast as I could, and never look back. But I couldn't move. My feet felt nailed to the soaked floorboards, every muscle locked tight, with a terror so deep it seemed to seep into my bones. From the darkness beyond the threshold, I heard soft, wet footsteps approaching, slow, purposeful, and then a voice, low and guttural, rasped through the open gap. "We warned you." I backed up until my spine pressed against the wall, my palms slick with sweat and river water. The small figure at the stairs remained still, its face still obscured, but I could swear I saw a faint, unnatural smile stretching across the shadow where its mouth should be. The footsteps grew louder, echoing through the entryway like someone walking through shallow water. The air thickened with moisture, the walls sweating rivulets of cold liquid that dripped steadily to the floor. My heart pounded so violently, it hurt. I could feel every beat reverberating in my skull, drowning out all thought except one: don't let them in. But it was too late. They were already inside. A hand emerged from the darkness first, pale and bloated, skin hanging loosely from bone as water streamed from its fingertips. It gripped the doorframe, nails long and jagged, scraping deep grooves into the wood. Then another hand, then a face, if it could be called that, hollow sockets where eyes should be, a mouth stretched unnaturally wide, water gushing endlessly from between its teeth. Behind it, more faces appeared. Dozens, maybe hundreds, each one bloated, twisted, dripping with black river water. The whispers returned, deafening now, overlapping in a chaotic, otherworldly chorus. You took him, you stole him, he was ours, now you are too. Their voices filled every corner of my mind, sinking into me like hooks, pulling me toward the door. I clamped my hands over my ears, shaking my head violently as tears streamed down my face. No, I whispered, though my voice was barely audible over the cacophony. I didn't know. I didn't mean to. But the words stuck in my throat as the first figure stepped fully into the house, its bare feet slapping against the wet floor. Water pooled around it in widening circles, soaking into the wood like blood into fabric. The air turned ice cold, my breath fogging in front of me as I pressed harder against the wall, desperate to melt into it. One by one, the others followed, their bodies moving with unnatural jerky motions, heads lolling from side to side like broken dolls. The childlike figure at the stairs lowered its arm at last and began to ascend slowly, each step deliberate, echoing with wet squelches. It passed me without acknowledgement, its presence somehow heavier than the others, and disappeared into the upper hallway. As it vanished, the house seemed to groan in protest, the walls pulsing faintly, as though the very structure was alive. The group of pale, dripping forms in the entryway stopped a few feet from me, their hollow eyes fixed on my trembling body. The tallest of them stepped forward, towering over me, and leaned in so close I could feel the chill radiating from its rotting skin. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, and from its depths came a sound I'll never forget, a distorted, bubbling voice that spoke in unison with all the others. The river gives, the river takes. Without warning, the figure's icy hand shot out, gripping my wrist with crushing force. I cried out, struggling to wrench free, but its strength was inhuman. Its other hand rose and pressed against my chest, and suddenly I felt it, the weight of the river. Water surged into my lungs, cold and thick, as if I were being dragged under. I choked and gasped, clutching at its arm, but my fingers slipped on the slick, rotting flesh. My vision blurred as black spots bloomed across my sight. I could hear the faint sound of rushing water, growing louder and louder until it drowned out everything else. The last thing I saw before darkness consumed me was the front door swinging shut on its own, sealing the house in absolute silence. I woke choking on water that wasn't there. My lungs burned as I clawed at my chest, coughing until bile rose in my throat. The sound of rushing water was everywhere, filling my ears, pounding in my skull like a second heartbeat. I gasped for air, trembling violently, my clothes still damp and clinging to my skin. The floor beneath me felt cold and unsteady, as though it might give way at any second. For a moment I didn't dare open my eyes, afraid of what I'd see. When I finally did, I was still in the house. But it wasn't the same. The walls dripped with moisture, swollen and warped as if they had soaked for years. Black mold crawled in thick veins across the ceiling. The air smelled of rot and stagnant water, so strong it clung to the back of my throat. Somewhere far off, I heard knocking. Not loud, just faint, patient, as though it had all the time in the world. I tried to stand, my legs buckling under me. Every muscle in my body ached, like I'd been swimming against a current for hours. My fingers brushed the floorboards, and they were soft to the touch, like damp cardboard ready to tear. I pushed myself upright, my chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. The house was silent, except for the distant knocking and the faint dripping of water from unseen cracks. I looked toward the staircase. The childlike figure was gone, but wet footprints trailed upward, vanishing into the darkness above. I didn't want to follow, yet something inside me, the same cruel curiosity that had made me open the closet door, pulled me forward. As I moved, I left footprints too, though I hadn't stepped in water. They appeared dark and wet with each press of my heel fading slowly behind me, like they were being swallowed by the house itself. Halfway up the stairs I heard a voice. It wasn't whispering this time. It spoke in a clear, hollow tone that vibrated through the walls. "It's inside you now." I froze, my hand gripping the banister so tight, the damp wood splintered beneath my fingers. My breath caught as the voice repeated itself, louder this time, closer. "It's inside you now." My skin crawled as something cold and slick slithered beneath it, moving under the surface like a fish darting just out of sight. I clawed at my arms in a panic, convinced I could tear whatever it was free, but there was nothing, no lumps, no movement, just the phantom sensation of being hollowed out. At the top of the stairs I paused. The hallway stretched out before me, impossibly long and suffocatingly narrow. The walls seemed to pulse faintly, wet patches blooming and receding in rhythm with my racing heart. Each door I passed bore dark stains around the edges, as though water had seeped from the cracks for years. As I reached my bedroom door, a low creak sounded behind me. I spun around, knife raised out of instinct, but the hall was empty. No shadows moved, no figures waited. Only the faint sound of breathing, not my own, lingered in the air. I turned back to the bedroom and stopped. The door was open. It hadn't been before. From inside came the sound of soft splashing, like someone walking through ankle-deep water. My fingers tightened around the knife's handle until they ached. I wanted to back away, to turn and run, but my feet betrayed me again, carrying me forward into the room. The smell hit me first, pungent and cloying, a mix of river mud and decay. The floor was covered in water, dark and thick like oil. As I stepped in, it clung to my legs, dragging at me with invisible hands. Across the room, in the corner where my closet stood, a shape crouched low, its back to me. It was small, childlike, but its limbs were too long, joints bending at unnatural angles. Wet strands of hair clung to its pale scalp, and its skin glistened like raw meat. Slowly, its head began to turn, the motion jerky, neck cracking with each degree. I couldn't breathe as its face came into view. There were no eyes, just hollow sockets filled with writhing black water. Its mouth stretched into a ragged smile as it whispered in my voice, "We're hungry." I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the doorframe. The figure moved then, not toward me, but straight down into the water, vanishing soundlessly, as though the floor had swallowed it whole. The water rippled violently, waves crashing against my ankles. The house groaned around me,
walls shuddering as if bracing for something much larger. And then the knocking returned. This time, not from one spot, but everywhere at once. From beneath the floor, from inside the walls, from the ceiling above, each strike in perfect unison, shaking the house like the tolling of a massive bell.
The hallway seemed to stretch on forever as I ran, my bare feet pounding against the soaked floorboards, sending up small splashes with every step. The knocking chased me like a predator, pounding in perfect rhythm, each strike a little closer, a little louder. I didn't dare look back. Some primal part of me knew that if I turned, I would see them, those pale, bloated figures with hollow eyes, reaching for me with dripping hands. The walls groaned under the weight of their fists. The air vibrated with their voices. "You saved him. Now we take you." I slammed into the banister at the top of the stairs, nearly pitching forward. My chest heaved, every breath burning like ice in my lungs as I stumbled down. The wood soft beneath my feet, sagging as though it would collapse at any moment. But I didn't stop. I couldn't. When I hit the bottom floor, the smell of river water grew suffocating. It was everywhere, clinging to my skin, filling my mouth and nose until I gagged. The lights flickered violently overhead, and in each flash I saw them, figures pressed against the walls, their hands sliding down the wallpaper, leaving streaks of mud and water. They didn't move. Not really, but each time the lights blinked, they seemed closer, their heads tilted, smiles stretched too wide. I bolted for the front door, my hands fumbling with the lock, slick with sweat and grime. The metal was freezing cold, burning my fingers as I turned it, but the door wouldn't budge. I yanked harder, my shoulder slamming against the wood, but it felt like pushing against solid stone. Behind me the whispers rose again, a deafening chorus that seemed to come from inside my skull. "Let us in! Let us in!" Something wet brushed against the back of my neck. I spun, knife raised, but there was nothing there. Only the kitchen doorway yawning open in darkness, the faint sound of dripping water echoing from within. My heart thudded painfully as I backed away, my feet sliding on the slick floor. The whispers didn't stop. They only grew louder, more urgent until my ears rang with the sound. And then, clear as day, I heard a voice speak above them all, a voice I recognized. It was the man I'd pulled from the river, his tone calm and hollow. "You weren't supposed to save me." The words wrapped around me like chains, dragging me down, drowning me in guilt I couldn't shake. My hands trembled as I pressed them to my ears, sobbing, but no amount of pressure could block him out. The kitchen light flickered on by itself, casting a sickly yellow glow over the flooded tiles. A figure stood in the center of the room, facing away. Its clothes were tattered, clinging to a skeletal frame soaked in black water. I didn't need to see its face to know who it was. My stomach churned violently as it turned slowly, its head rotating far too far, cracking with each unnatural movement until its hollow eyes locked on me. Its lips parted in a smile, water spilling out in rivulets as it whispered, "They'll come for you." I stumbled back, slamming into the front door. My fingers scrambled again at the deadbolt, but it still refused to turn. The figure in the kitchen began to move toward me, its footsteps wet and deliberate. Each step sent ripples across the floor, the water deepening with every inch it advanced. My breath hitched as I looked down. The water was already at my ankles, rising fast. I turned to the stairs, but a childlike figure now stood at the top, its head cocked to one side. Its body dripped endlessly, small puddles forming beneath its bare feet. Its voice was barely above a whisper, but the words were clear. "The river remembers. The air grew so cold my skin burned. Frost formed on the walls, spreading in spiderweb patterns as my breaths came out in thick clouds. I backed into the living room, the water now at my knees, sloshing with every frantic movement. The figures followed without haste, their pace steady, certain, as if they knew I had nowhere left to run. I tried to scream, but the sound stuck in my throat. My vision blurred, black spots forming at the edges as my chest constricted. Every inch of me felt heavy, sluggish, like I was already submerged. My knife slipped from my hand, vanishing beneath the water with a soft splash. The house groaned violently, its foundations shuddering, as though something massive shifted beneath it. A deep, guttural sound rose from the walls, a low hum that vibrated in my ribs and teeth. Then I felt it. A pull. The water at my knees surged with invisible force, dragging me toward the center of the room. I clawed at the walls, my nails ripping into the soggy plaster as I tried to hold on. But the current was too strong. It tore me free, pulling me down into the freezing depths. My mouth filled with bitter water as I screamed soundlessly, my body thrashing against the grip of unseen hands. The last thing I saw before going under was the man's face, hovering just above the surface, his black eyes watching with hollow calm as his lips moved silently. "You shouldn't have saved me." The water was endless. It filled my lungs, my nose, my ears, pressing into every part of me with crushing weight. I thrashed wildly, but the current's pull was relentless, dragging me deeper into the darkness below. My eyes burned, but when I forced them open, I didn't see water. I saw faces, countless pale faces suspended in the black, their mouths gaping open, as if screaming silently, though no bubbles escaped their lips. Their hollow sockets followed me as I sank past them, their hair floating like weeds in a stagnant pond. Hands reached for me, bloated fingers brushing my arms and legs, leaving trails of icy numbness in their wake. I tried to cry out, but my voice dissolved into the void, swallowed whole by the suffocating cold. Then through the darkness, I saw him, the man from the river. He hovered motionless, his arms outstretched as if welcoming me, his black eyes unblinking. "You're one of us now," he whispered, though his lips never moved. Suddenly the current shifted, jerking me sideways. My body slammed into something solid, pain shooting through my ribs. I clawed at it desperately, my fingers sinking into soft, rotted wood. It was a door, floating upright in the blackness, its surface warped and swollen with water damage. Without thinking, I grabbed the handle and pulled. It swung open with an agonizing creak, revealing not more darkness but my living room. I tumbled through, coughing and retching, as I hit the floor hard. The water was gone. The air was dry, but it stank of mold and decay. My body trembled violently, my clothes hanging heavy and damp. I tried to push myself up, but my limbs felt foreign, heavy as lead, as though I had brought some of the river back with me. The house was quiet, too quiet. The knocking had stopped. The whispers were gone. Only the faint sound of my ragged breathing filled the air. I staggered to my feet, my knees buckling under my weight. The lights were out, leaving the room bathed in sickly grey light from the moon outside. The front door stood open now, its frame warped and dripping. A cold breeze drifted in, carrying with it the scent of river mud and something fouler, decay so strong it turned my stomach. I took a tentative step toward the doorway, my bare foot squelching against the damp floor. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't mine. Small, bare prints trailed from the door into the center of the room, each one surrounded by faint ripples of water. I followed them with my eyes until they stopped abruptly. Nothing was there, no child, no figure, but I could feel it. The air was heavy, pressing down on me like unseen hands. My skin prickled as I turned slowly, scanning every corner. Then I heard it, a wet, rasping breath directly behind me. My heart lurched as I spun around. A small face stared up at me, impossibly close, hollow black sockets where eyes should have been. A slack mouth spilling water that ran down its chin and dripped onto the floor. Its tiny voice broke the silence, gurgling and wet. "You brought us home." I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the warped floorboards. The childlike figure didn't move, but I swear its grin widened, stretching impossibly until it nearly split its face in two. Behind it, the shadows shifted. More figures emerged from the darkness, tall and gaunt, their limbs too long, their skin pale and bloated. They moved with slow, deliberate steps, their wet footprints marking the floor like stains. One by one, they filled the room, surrounding me in a loose circle. The man from the river appeared last, his head tilting as his black eyes locked on mine. His voice resonated from everywhere at once. "The river doesn't forgive." My knees buckled, but I forced myself upright, my hand scrambling for the knife I had dropped earlier, but it was gone, swallowed by the house or the water, or maybe both. The figures closed in, their footsteps echoing like distant drums. I could smell them now, stale river water and the sharp copper tang of decay. Their whispers began again, layering over each other in a suffocating wall of sound. "We're here, we're here." I clamped my hands over my ears, screaming wordlessly, but it didn't stop the voices. They were inside me now, pulsing behind my eyes, clawing at my skull from within. The man reached for me, his hand dripping, his fingers so long they nearly brushed my cheek. "You don't belong here anymore," he said softly, "but we'll make you fit." I backed away until my shoulders pressed hard against the crumbling wall. The bloated figures tightened their circle, moving with the heavy, deliberate grace of predators that already knew their prey couldn't escape. Water pooled beneath their feet, seeping outward, climbing up my ankles, cold as ice. My teeth chattered violently, my body shaking uncontrollably. But it wasn't just from the cold. The whispers in my skull had grown louder, pressing against my thoughts like weeds breaking through cracks. "You're already drowning. You've been drowning since the moment you touched him." Their voices weren't angry now. They sounded almost tender, like a lullaby meant to soothe me as I sank. The childlike figure took a step closer. Its movements were jerky, marionette-like, its head twitching from side to side as it regarded me with empty sockets. It crouched in front of me, pale fingers brushing the surface of the rising water as it tilted its head. A voice, small and wet, slipped from its slack mouth. "Do you remember the river's mouth? The hands pulling at your ankles. You didn't save him. You stole him. And now it wants you." My breath hitched, my chest constricting painfully as images flashed unbidden in my mind. The man's cold skin under my hands, the way his lips had moved without sound as I dragged him from the water, the moment his eyes had snapped open and locked on mine. I had thought it was gratitude, but now I knew it wasn't. The man stepped forward, his towering form blotting out what little moonlight seeped through the warped windows. His hollow gaze pinned me in place as he crouched low, his knees cracking audibly. His voice rumbled from the depths of his chest, impossibly deep. The river doesn't give freely. Everything taken must be returned. His fingers brushed my cheek, leaving a trail of icy wetness that burned like acid. My skin prickled as though something beneath it was shifting, writhing. I screamed, slapping his hand away, but the sound barely escaped my throat before the whispers roared to life again. You can't fight it. It's in you now, flowing through your veins. I stumbled to my feet, my legs weak, barely able to support my weight. The water had reached my thighs, its surface rippling with unseen movement. Shadows passed beneath it, circling me like sharks. I turned toward the staircase, but the childlike figure now blocked my path. Its mouth opened impossibly wide, water spilling from its gullet as it spoke in a distorted chorus of many voices. There's nowhere to run. I lurched past it anyway, shoving hard against its frail frame. My hands met nothing but icy air as it dissolved before my eyes, vanishing into the rising water with a faint splash. I bolted up the stairs, slipping, stumbling, my feet slamming against the soaked wood as the house groaned and shuddered like a living thing. At the top, I clawed for the bedroom door and slammed it shut behind me. My hands shook violently as I shoved a chair under the knob, though I knew deep down it wouldn't matter. The water was already seeping in from under the door, a slow, steady trickle that spread across the floor toward my feet. My chest heaved as I backed away, my eyes darting around wildly. The room felt smaller than before, the ceiling lower, the walls warped and closing in. Every surface dripped. My reflection in the cracked mirror stared back at me, but something was wrong. Its movements lagged a fraction of a second behind mine, and its eyes, they weren't mine. They were black, hollow, like the man's. The reflection smiled. You can't shut it out. You invited it the moment you saved him. It raised a pale hand and pressed it against the glass. Water bloomed around its fingers, leaking from the mirror's edges. The surface rippled once, twice, and then the reflection lunged forward. I stumbled back as its hand broke through, fingers wrapping around my wrist with impossible strength. I pulled violently, but the grip only tightened, cold and wet and unyielding. The whispers filled the room, deafening now. Join us, sink, let go. With a final desperate wrench, I tore free and stumbled into the closet. I slammed the door shut behind me, pressing my back against it as tears streamed down my face. The darkness inside was absolute, the air thick and damp, each breath tasting of mildew. I sank to the floor, clutching my knees to my chest as my body shook violently. Outside, I could hear them. The knocking had returned, slow, deliberate, spreading across every wall of the house in perfect unison. I pressed my hands over my ears, rocking back and forth as I whispered to myself, "It's not real. It's not real." But deep down, I knew it was. The whispers seeped through the cracks in the wood, curling around my thoughts like vines. You saved him, now drown for him. And then a final voice, calm and hollow, we're already inside. The silence was unbearable. It wasn't the calm, reassuring quiet of an empty house. It was thick, oppressive, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting. I pressed my palm against my chest, feeling my heart hammer against my ribs like it was trying to escape. My clothes clung to my skin, heavy and cold, still damp from whatever had just happened. or maybe from what was still happening. My feet shifted on the warped floorboards, each creak echoing too loud in the stale air. I wanted to believe it was over, that the figures in the water, the whispers, the knocking, they were all just some feverish hallucination. But deep down, I knew better. The river wasn't done with me. A faint sound drew my gaze to the hallway. It was soft at first, like dripping water, tap, tap, tap. Then it grew louder, heavier, until each drop sounded like a pebble striking glass. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Despite the damp air, slowly I crept toward the sound, my bare feet sticking slightly to the floor, as though something unseen tried to hold me back. The hallway stretched endlessly, darkness pooling at its edges, thick enough to feel. The tapping continued, rhythmic and patient, guiding me forward. When I reached the end, I froze. The bathroom door was ajar, and from the crack spilled a faint blue glow. My breath caught as I pushed the door open, my fingers trembling. The tub was full to the brim with dark water, its surface perfectly still, except for the occasional ripple that spread outward in lazy circles. The glow emanated from beneath the water, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. My reflection wavered in the surface, distorted and wrong. Its eyes were black voids, its mouth open wide in a silent scream. I stumbled back, slamming into the counter as a single word echoed in my head: return. The water began to rise, spilling over the edge of the tub and cascading across the floor in thick, black sheets. It moved with purpose, snaking toward my feet. I scrambled for the door, but it slammed shut with a deafening bang, locking me in. The air grew heavy, thick with moisture, and my lungs burned with every shallow breath. The water climbed higher, reaching my ankles, then my knees. I pounded on the door, screaming, but my voice was swallowed by the sound of rushing water. Behind me, the reflection in the tub began to climb out. Its hands, pale, bloated, dripping, gripped the porcelain edge as it hauled itself up. Water poured from its gaping mouth as its eyeless face turned toward me. My back hit the far wall as I pressed myself against it, my fingers digging into the damp plaster. The figure stepped fully onto the floor, its feet leaving black puddles that hissed and steamed. It moved toward me in slow, jerky steps, its head tilting unnaturally as it whispered, "The river remembers." I lunged for the window, my fists slamming against the glass in a desperate bid for escape. The figure's cold hand brushed my shoulder, and a sharp jolt of pain shot through my body like an electric current. My vision blurred as I felt the same writhing sensation beneath my skin, the invasive, crawling presence spreading through my veins. I turned sharply, swinging my arm wildly to knock the figure back, but my hand passed through it like smoke. Its form wavered, then solidified again, closer this time. Its slack mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, and water surged from it in a violent torrent. I screamed as it struck me, knocking me off my feet and pinning me to the floor beneath its weight. The black water filled my mouth, my nose, my lungs. I thrashed, my hands clawing at the figure's featureless face, but they slipped uselessly across its slick skin. The voices returned in a deafening chorus, chanting in unison, "You are already ours. Stop fighting. Sink." My movements slowed as the cold seeped into my bones, my body growing heavier by the second. My vision dimmed, darkness creeping inward like ink spilled in water. Just as my strength faltered completely, a faint sound broke through the chaos. It was faint at first, 3 distinct knocks, slow and deliberate. Knock, knock. The figure paused, its head snapping toward the door as the knocking grew louder. Knock, knock, knock. The sound reverberated through the house like a heartbeat, shaking the walls, the floor, even the air itself. The water around me receded slightly, and I felt the crushing weight on my chest lessen. My eyes darted to the door, which now trembled violently as the knocking became frantic, desperate. Then a voice, clear, strong, human, shouted from the other side. "Don't open it. No matter what happens, don't open it." I gasped as the black water drained completely from my lungs, leaving me coughing and retching on the wet floor. The figure's form wavered, flickering like a weak flame before vanishing entirely. The door burst open, and a rush of cold air swept into the room, carrying with it the scent of river mud and decay. But the hallway beyond was empty. Whoever had spoken was gone. My body shook violently as I forced myself to my feet, gripping the door frame for balance. The silence returned, heavier than ever. I stumbled into the hallway, my legs trembling like brittle branches in a storm. The floorboards beneath my feet squelched with every step, each one leaving behind a faint wet print that seemed to darken as I moved. My breath came in shallow gasps, each inhale tasting of mildew and river silt. The house was silent again, but it wasn't the kind of silence that brought peace. It felt watchful, expectant, as if every crack in the walls and ceiling held unseen eyes waiting for me to slip. Somewhere deep in my chest, I could still feel the river's pull, a subtle current tugging at my ribs, urging me back. "You're still in the water," a voice murmured faintly, and I couldn't tell if it was inside my head or drifting up from the floorboards. The hallway seemed longer now, impossibly so, stretching away like a corridor in a nightmare. As I moved forward, faint shapes began to take form in the damp wallpaper, pale faces pressed outward from the walls, their mouths opening and closing silently as their hollow eyes followed me. I quickened my pace, my hands brushing against the peeling plaster for balance. A sudden knock rang out behind me, sharp and deliberate. I froze, my skin crawling. Knock, knock. It came again, closer this time. My breath hitched as I turned slowly, my eyes scanning the dim corridor. Nothing, but the air felt heavier now, charged with an unseen presence. I forced my feet to move, faster now, each step echoing louder than the last. Ahead, the front door stood slightly ajar, a faint light spilling through the crack. My heart leapt with hope, irrational but fierce. I broke into a run, my footsteps pounding against the floorboards. The faces in the walls twisted, their mouths widening into silent screams as black water began to seep from their sockets. My fingers brushed the doorknob, just as the knocking erupted again, this time from every wall at once. The sound was deafening, each impact reverberating through my bones. "Don't open it," the disembodied voice from before warned, closer now, almost in my ear. "It's not a door anymore, it's a mouth." I yanked my hand back as the door shuddered violently. The crack widened, and through it I saw darkness. Not the absence of light, but a churning void filled with swirling pale forms. Hands shot out from the gap, bloated and dripping, grasping blindly for me. Their nails scraped deep grooves into the wood as they pulled themselves through. My body moved before my mind could catch up, spinning on its heel as I bolted up the staircase. The air thickened with moisture as black water bubbled up through the gaps in the floorboards, chasing me upward in a rising tide. Each step groaned under my weight, threatening to give way. At the top, I slammed into the bedroom and shoved the door closed behind me. I threw my weight against it as the knocking resumed, now frantic and furious. The walls vibrated violently, shedding flakes of damp plaster like snow. My chest heaved as I scanned the room, desperate for escape. Then I saw it. The mirror. It stood propped in the corner, its surface rippling faintly like a disturbed pond. My reflection stared back, but its movements were no longer my own. It smiled, a slow, wide grin that split its pale face as water began to leak from its mouth. "We said, don't open it," it whispered. "But you already did." The knocking stopped abruptly. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. Then a new sound emerged, a soft, wet slapping like bare feet on soaked wood. I turned toward the sound as the closet door creaked open. Darkness bled from the gap, and within it, a single pale hand gripped the edge. The man from the river stepped out, his black eyes fixed on me with that same unnerving calm. Water streamed from his body, pooling at his feet as he took one slow step after another. His voice was low, reverberating in the walls. "You stole me from the river. It wants balance." I backed away, my spine pressing into the cold glass of the mirror. The surface rippled wildly now, distorting my reflection into a swirling mass of pale limbs and hollow eyes. The man reached for me, his fingers inches from my skin when the mirror behind me exploded outward. I fell backward into icy black water, my scream lost to the current as the river swallowed me whole. The current dragged me down so fast. My ears popped, the pressure closing around my skull like a vice. My limbs flailed uselessly in the icy blackness as unseen things brushed against my skin. Slick, cold bodies sliding past like predators circling a kill. My lungs screamed for air, my chest tightening, until white-hot pain shot down my spine. Above me, the faint glow of the surface wavered like a dying star, impossibly far away. Shadows drifted closer, pale figures suspended in the water, their hair floating like seaweed. Their mouths gaped open in silent screams as their hands reached for me, fingers curling around my wrists and ankles. I tried to pull away, but their grip was iron. One by one, their faces swam into view. Familiar faces, faces of people I'd seen in news clippings and missing posters. Neighbors, strangers, the man I had saved. Their hollow black eyes bore into mine, as their lips moved in unison, releasing a single wordless sound, home. The water churned violently as more hands erupted from the darkness below, gripping my legs and yanking me further into the depths. I thrashed wildly, my nails raking across bloated skin, but the current was too strong, the grip too tight. A low, guttural voice rumbled from all directions. "The river takes. The river keeps." Then, just as I felt consciousness slipping, a pair of hands gripped my shoulders from above. Unlike the others, these hands were warm, solid. A muffled voice cut through the water. "Fight. You're not done yet." With one violent tug, I was yanked upward, my body shooting through the water like a puppet pulled by its strings. The figures screamed soundlessly below, their pale forms writhing as they tried to follow. But the current shifted, pushing them back as I rocketed toward the faint glow above. My chest ached, my vision spotted with black, as my outstretched fingers broke the surface. I exploded into air with a gasping scream, choking as water poured from my lungs. My body convulsed as I dragged in great lungfuls of damp, sour air. But I wasn't in my house, not anymore. I lay sprawled on a riverbank beneath a black sky, the water lapping at my feet. The trees that lined the shore loomed like jagged teeth, their branches gnarled and bare. The air was thick with mist that writhed like living things, curling around my legs as I staggered to my feet. Behind me, the river's surface was perfectly still, yet beneath it, faint shapes twisted and shifted, waiting, watching. A figure stood on the opposite bank. I couldn't make out its features, but its presence was suffocating. The mist seemed to coil around it like protective serpents. Slowly, it raised a hand, and though I was too far to hear, I felt its voice reverberate through my chest. The river never lets go. You're not on land. You're still drowning. My stomach churned as the ground beneath my feet rippled like water. I looked down in horror to see pale hands pressing upward through the mud, their fingers clawing at my ankles. With a scream, I kicked free and bolted toward the tree line. The forest swallowed me whole, branches snapping at my skin as I ran blindly into the thick, swirling fog. But no matter how far I went, the sound of water followed, dripping from the trees, gurgling beneath the earth, whispering in the wind. My breath came in ragged sobs as my legs burned with exhaustion. I stopped only when the trees opened into a small clearing. At its center stood a house. My house. Its warped walls leaned at impossible angles, its windows black voids that seemed to stare back. The front door hung open slightly, dripping water that pooled across the ground. Something compelled me forward. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the ground clung to my feet. When I reached the door, I hesitated. From inside came the sound of breathing. Not human breathing, but something deeper, wet, guttural. Then came the knock, just once this time, slow and deliberate. I reached for the doorknob, my fingers trembling. From behind me, a voice whispered so close it brushed my ear. This time, don't open it. My hand hovered over the doorknob, trembling so violently I thought it might tear free from my wrist. The voice behind me whispered again, fainter this time, almost pleading, "Don't let it in." I clenched my teeth, my chest heaving as I stared at the tarnished brass knob. The air around me had grown heavy, thick with moisture that beaded on my skin. Somewhere deep in the house, I heard it, a slow, deliberate knock. Knock, knock. The sound wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that vibrated in my bones, echoing in my skull like a second heartbeat. I swallowed hard, my throat raw as I whispered to no one. What happens if I open it? No answer came. Just the sound of water dripping steadily from the ceiling above. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. On the other side was not silence but breathing, wet, labored, rattling. I jerked back, bile rising in my throat, as a pale, bloated hand shot out from under the door. Its fingers stretched impossibly long, scraping furrows into the floorboards as they clawed toward my bare feet. I stumbled back, my heel catching on the warped wood as the hand withdrew, just as suddenly as it had appeared. The voice whispered once more, but this time from everywhere at once. "It's already inside." The house groaned, the sound deep and resonant, like a massive structure straining under some impossible weight. The walls bulged inward, damp plaster cracking as black water seeped from every seam. My legs moved before my mind could catch up, propelling me down the hallway as water poured in behind me, surging like a living thing. Each step sent up splashes as I ran, the frigid current biting at my skin, dragging at my ankles with unseen hands. The knocking began again, faster now, furious, reverberating from every surface, until it felt like the house itself was a drum. My heart pounded in time with it, the sound nearly drowning out my own ragged breathing. I threw myself up the stairs, taking them two at a time, as water crashed against my calves, rising faster with every heartbeat. Behind me, I could hear them, the pale, eyeless figures sloshing through the water, their movements jerky and unnatural. They called my name in unison, their voices a wet, gurgling chorus. "You saved him. You took him. You owe us." At the top of the stairs, I nearly slipped on the drenched carpet, catching myself on the doorframe to my bedroom. The mirror inside was no longer a mirror. Its surface rippled like a black pond, and from its depths, a face slowly emerged. The man from the river stared at me, his empty black eyes locking onto mine as water streamed from his slack mouth. He raised a hand, beckoning with one finger. The voice in my head was his now, clear and deliberate. "You don't have to run, just sink." The mirror bulged outward as if trying to birth him into the room. Cracks spiderwebbed across its surface, and with each fracture, the knocking grew louder, more insistent. Knock, knock. My ears rang from the sound, my knees buckling as I clutched at my head. The floor gave way beneath me in an explosion of water and splintered wood. I plunged into darkness again, the cold a living thing that wrapped around me, crushing and hungry. This time, there was no surface above, no faint light to guide me, only the river's eternal blackness, stretching in every direction. The pale figures swam in circles, their dead eyes trained on me as they whispered, "You never left, you never will." My body felt heavier, slower, as though I'd been underwater forever. My lungs burned, not for air but from the realization that maybe I didn't need it anymore. Somewhere in the distance, I heard a faint knocking, slow, patient, a reminder, and then another sound, a voice so faint it was almost lost to the current. My fingers twitched. The river growled around me, furious as I forced my arms to move, my legs to kick weakly against the pull. The figures hissed and screamed as I clawed upward blindly, my nails raking across their bloated faces as they grabbed for me. The current roared louder, trying to drag me back into its depths, but I kept pushing, kept kicking, until finally my hand broke through. I gasped, choking on air, as I tumbled onto soaked floorboards. The house was silent again. No water, no knocking, no figures, just me, lying in a puddle of my own sweat and tears, trembling violently, but deep down, I could still feel it, the faint pull of the river inside my veins, whispering promises I couldn't quite hear. And then came the final sound, impossibly close, whispered directly into my ear. "You can't hold your breath forever." The house smelled of river mud and rot. It clung to the walls, seeped into the furniture, filled every breath I took. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, knees pulled tight to my chest, staring at the closet door across the room. It stood ajar, as it always seemed to now, and from within came the faint sound of water dripping onto wood. I hadn't moved in hours. I couldn't. Every time I tried, I felt it, the current beneath my skin. It wasn't violent, not yet, but it was patient, coiling, waiting. My heart thudded in my ears as I pressed a trembling hand against my chest, feeling the faint rhythmic pull of something other than my own pulse. "You're already drowning," the man's voice echoed in my head. "Your body just hasn't realized." I flinched as a knock echoed from the hall. Just one this time, slow, measured. I didn't answer. I couldn't. The knock came again, louder, closer. My phone lay on the floor next to me, its screen cracked from my earlier fall. I snatched it up with shaking hands and dialed the only number I could think of: emergency services. The line clicked once, then silence. No ringing, no operator, just silence, so thick I could hear my own shallow breaths rasping through the speaker. And then, water. A soft, wet, gurgling sound that grew louder until it filled my ears. I threw the phone across the room. It struck the wall and slid into the shadows near the closet, vanishing from sight. I wanted to scream, but even my voice felt stolen. My throat ached as I forced myself to my feet, each movement sending sharp pain through my muscles. It was like my body had been wrung out, left damp and heavy, a rag half submerged in river water. I stumbled toward the door, my fingers brushing the cold brass knob. I hesitated. Behind me, the closet door creaked wider. The dripping stopped. I turned slightly, my eyes catching on the mirror propped against the far wall. My reflection stared back, except it wasn't mine. Its eyes were black voids, its mouth hanging open in a grin too wide for any human face. Water leaked from the corners of its lips, dripping down its chin in steady rivulets. It raised a hand and pressed it flat against the glass. My breath hitched as the surface of the mirror rippled, distorting the figure's bloated features. I stumbled backward, knocking over a chair as a faint voice whispered from the glass. "The river is patient, but it is always hungry." The knocking returned, louder now, pounding from all sides of the house in a chaotic rhythm. My hands flew to my ears, as if that could stop the sound, but it vibrated through the floorboards, the walls, even my teeth. I darted into the hallway, my bare feet slipping on the wet boards as I ran for the stairs. The air felt thick, heavy with moisture, every breath a struggle against invisible water pressing into my lungs. Halfway down the stairs, I froze. The front door was wide open. Beyond it stretched, not my street, not my neighborhood, but the river, black, endless, churning. Pale figures stood at its edge, their bodies swaying with the unseen current, their eyeless faces tilted toward me. One of them raised an arm, its finger pointing directly at me. In unison they whispered, "Sink." I backed away slowly, my hand gripping the banister until my knuckles turned white. The stairs groaned beneath my weight as water began to bubble up between the boards, dark and cold. It licked at my toes, rising faster than I could comprehend. I bolted back up the stairs, my chest heaving as the cold climbed after me. At the top, the knocking resumed, this time from my bedroom. My heart pounded so hard, I thought my ribs might crack. The hallway stretched endlessly, each door warped and dripping. I forced myself forward, one trembling step at a time, until I stood before the bedroom door. It swung open of its own accord, revealing nothing but darkness inside. And then from within came the voice, low, wet, familiar. "You can't hold your breath forever." A pale hand shot out of the darkness, gripping my wrist with impossible strength. I screamed as the floor beneath me gave way again. Water surged upward, enveloping me in its crushing cold. My body spun wildly as unseen hands grabbed my ankles, pulling me deeper. My lungs burned as I struggled, but my movements were sluggish, heavy. Shadows circled me, whispering in voices I almost recognized. The river didn't just want me, it was inside me now. Every beat of my heart felt like a wave crashing against unseen shores. As my vision began to blur, I caught one last glimpse of the surface far above, a faint glow, unreachable, already fading. I woke in a cold bed, that wasn't mine. Sheets soaked in river water clung to my skin, and the walls around me pulsed faintly, like the inside of a living body. The ceiling was dripping, rhythmic and deliberate, each drop hitting my forehead like a metronome. My arms wouldn't move at first. My legs were numb. I blinked at the dim ceiling, and as I focused, I saw faces, pale, pressed into the plaster, their mouths moving silently. The river had followed me. No, it hadn't followed me. It had brought me here. This room wasn't in my house. It wasn't anywhere I'd ever been. It was between, a place made of water, memory, and grief. A pressure formed behind my eyes, and without warning, I wept. The tears ran down my cheeks and pooled in my ears, and somewhere deep inside, I could feel the water was rising again. This is the drowning. It happens slowly. It always does. My body jerked to life. I rolled from the bed and hit the floor hard. Black water seeped from between the floorboards and soaked through my clothes. The air tasted like rust, and with every breath, the pressure in my chest grew tighter. I crawled toward the door, dragging my limbs like they'd forgotten how to function. When I reached it, I braced myself, but there was no knob, just smooth, pulsing wood. I pressed my hand against it. It was warm, too warm. The door exhaled, and then it opened on its own. I found myself in a hallway of mirrors, each one taller than the last. My reflections stared back at me, but not a single one matched my movement. One turned to look behind itself, and I instinctively spun around. But there was only water there, water dripping upward into the ceiling. Another reflection smiled while I sobbed. Another blinked when I didn't. One raised its hand, and I watched with growing dread as it began to claw at its own skin, peeling it away like wet paper. I looked down at my own hands, wrinkled, pale, waterlogged. I backed away from the mirror, but the hallway moved with me, closing in on all sides like a throat swallowing. The air buzzed with whispers, not malicious, not even angry, just disappointed. "You weren't supposed to save him," one said. "He was already taken," murmured another. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voices grew louder inside my skull. "He brought us back with him. You opened the floodgate." I slammed my fists against the walls, but they only pulsed, absorbing the blows like thick skin. Then the knocking returned, so faint it might have been imagined, but I knew better. I turned around slowly. Every mirror now showed the same thing. The man from the river, standing directly behind me, his black eyes fixed on mine. I didn't move, couldn't move. His reflection raised a hand, and so did I. Only mine trembled with fear. His was steady, calm. A single word escaped his lips, yet I heard it echo through the entire corridor. "Come." My body moved without permission, legs stumbling toward the end of the hallway where a staircase descended into darkness. Water trickled down the steps, forming tiny rivulets that fed a growing pool at the bottom. Each stair creaked with unbearable pressure. As I descended, the sound sharp and hollow like bones snapping underfoot. The closer I got to the base, the darker it became, until the world was nothing but black water and breathless dread. At the bottom, I found another door, this one covered in moss and barnacles, as if it had been underwater for decades. A faded sign hung crookedly above it, "Return." I reached for the handle, but it melted away beneath my touch, dissolving into black slime that coated my hands. I stumbled back, retching, but there was nowhere to go. The hallway behind me had vanished. Only the door remained. The man's voice returned, soft but inescapable. You saved what the river wanted. Now the river wants you. My feet moved again, pushing me forward, until the moss-coated door swung open and swallowed me whole. The world on the other side was silence. I stood in a replica of my living room, but everything was off, warped. The furniture sagged like wet cardboard. The walls pulsed with slow, rhythmic breath. The clock on the wall ran backward, its hands dripping water with every tick. I took a step forward, and the floor beneath my foot let out a wet sigh. Then I saw the man again, not standing, floating. His face hovered inches from mine, his mouth wide open. He whispered one final time, "You breathe because we let you." I gasped. My lungs seized. The room imploded, and then I was drowning again. The water didn't feel cold anymore. It felt alive. It wrapped around me like an embrace, pressing against every inch of my skin until I couldn't tell where my body ended and the river began. I floated in a black void where no light could penetrate. Yet I saw everything. Faces bloomed in the darkness, some screaming, others whispering, their mouths leaking endless streams of water. I tried to kick, to claw upward, but my arms moved like they belonged to someone else. The river didn't resist. It let me flail. It wanted me to see, to understand. The man's voice drifted through the current, low and patient. The river isn't a place, it's a memory, and now it remembers you. A pale hand appeared below me, fingers curling lazily before gripping my ankle. I jerked, trying to shake it off, but another hand grasped my other leg. Then more dozens, each one bloated and wrinkled, their nails sharp as they dragged across my skin. My mouth opened in a scream that filled with water. It burned going in, but didn't come out. My chest convulsed, desperate for air, but none came. Instead, my lungs filled with the river's voice. It whispered directly into my blood. "You saved him, but you never asked what he cost." The hands pulled me deeper, past familiar objects, suspended in the dark current. A bicycle wheel, a cracked porcelain doll, a door frame still dripping paint. Things I recognized, things from my house. The river was showing me pieces of the life I had before, but each piece was warped, rotten, as if submerged for years. I tried to scream again, tried to force the water from my chest, but the current grew stronger, pulling at my ribs like invisible hooks. My body jerked downward violently, and I slammed into something solid. It was a floor wooden, damp, and endless. I coughed violently as I realized I could breathe again, but the air was no relief. It reeked of mold and rot. My hands pressed against the boards, slick with moss and mud. Above me, the ceiling rippled like water, and faces pressed against its surface, their mouths still moving soundlessly. A door stood ahead, glowing faintly. On it, a single word etched in dripping letters. "Breathe." I staggered toward it, my legs weak and unsteady. Every step sent echoes through the floorboards, like distant knocks. I reached for the handle, but the wood pulsed under my fingers like living flesh. My stomach lurched as the door creaked open, revealing a perfect replica of my house's kitchen. The table sat in the center, set for dinner. 4 chairs, one was overturned. The others occupied by pale, bloated figures, their heads slumped forward, water streaming from their mouths to the floor. They twitched as I entered, their black eyes snapping open in unison. One lifted its head slowly, its lips parted, and my own voice came out, warped and wet. You were never meant to leave. I stumbled back, hitting the doorframe as the figures rose to their feet. Their movements were jerky, unnatural, water dripping from their joints with every step. They moved as one, their heads tilting in perfect sync as they advanced. My breath came fast and shallow as I scrambled backward into the hall. But there was no hall, just more water, rising rapidly around my ankles, then my knees. The figures didn't stop. They waded through the black tide with ease, their pale fingers outstretched. One touched my shoulder, and I felt it, the current beneath my skin, stronger than ever, pulsing in time with my racing heart. I screamed as my body convulsed, my muscles locking up. The current wasn't pulling me down this time. It was trying to wear me like a skin. The voice returned, louder now, not just in my head, but vibrating through the walls, the floor, my own bones. Stop resisting. You saved him. Now you take his place. I thrashed, water filling my ears, my nose, my mouth, until the world became nothing but pressure and darkness. And then, just as suddenly, I was lying on my living room floor again, coughing up thick black water. The house was silent, too silent. The air felt thinner somehow, like the walls were holding in a breath. I crawled to my knees, shaking violently as the dripping sound returned, slow, steady, inevitable. I raised my head and froze. The man from the river stood in the doorway, water pouring from his hair and clothes, pooling at his bare feet. He smiled. "You're almost ready," he whispered. Then he stepped forward, and every light in the house went out. The darkness wasn't empty. It moved. It breathed. I crouched low to the floor, the boards cold and damp beneath my hands as I strained to hear over my own ragged breathing. Every breath felt like dragging water into my lungs, thick and heavy. Somewhere above me, the sound of dripping water resumed, steady, patient. Knock, knock. I swallowed hard, my throat raw, and whispered to no one, "I'm still here." The words felt strange in my mouth, foreign, like they belonged to someone else. A faint chuckle echoed from the walls, wet and gurgling, followed by a whisper, "Not for long." The man from the river was closer now. I couldn't see him, but I felt him, his presence pressing against my skin, seeping into my pores like the cold. His voice slid through the darkness like an eel. "Every breath is borrowed, every heartbeat a gift." I bolted upright and stumbled backward, my feet slipping on the soaked boards. My hands found the wall, slick with condensation, and I used it to steady myself. But the wall pulsed faintly, like something alive. Beneath my palms, I felt a heartbeat, not mine. The house was alive now, and it was breathing with me. A sudden splash made me whirl around. Black water was pooling in the center of the room, spreading outward in tendrils that curled like grasping fingers. I backed away, but my heel caught on something soft. I glanced down and saw a hand, pale, bloated, reaching out from beneath the floorboards. Its fingers flexed weakly before going still. Then another hand appeared, then another. Soon dozens of hands pressed through the cracks, clawing upward, dragging themselves from the depths. My breath hitched as the first figure emerged fully, its eyeless face turned toward me, mouth open in a silent scream. The figures staggered forward in jerky, unnatural movements, water streaming from their limbs. Their gurgling voices rose together into a single deafening whisper. "You took him. Now give him back." I stumbled toward the hallway, but the water followed, rushing after me with unnatural speed. Each step felt heavier as the current tried to pull me down. My lungs burned as if I were already underwater. I could hear the river's heartbeat now, slow and steady, vibrating in my chest. My hands slapped against the stair railing as I hauled myself upward, each movement a battle against the invisible tide. At the top of the stairs, the air felt different, thinner, colder. The knocking began again, this time from every door, every wall, every surface. Knock, knock. The sound surrounded me, swallowing my own screams. I darted into my bedroom and slammed the door shut behind me. My reflection stared back from the mirror across the room, but it wasn't me anymore. Its black eyes glistened like wet stones, and its mouth moved without sound. Then it raised a hand, pointing directly behind me. I turned, my stomach dropping, as the man from the river stood mere inches away. His soaked clothes clung to his emaciated frame, and water streamed steadily from his fingers, pooling at my feet. He didn't speak this time. He only reached out, his touch cold as it brushed against my cheek. A voice not his, but the river's filled my head. Breathe in. My body obeyed without question, my chest expanding as icy water filled my lungs. I choked, falling to my knees as my vision blurred. Now sink. The floor gave way beneath me in a rush of water and darkness. I tumbled endlessly, spinning as the current twisted me in its grip. Shadows circled, whispering in voices that belonged to every drowned soul I had ever tried to save. My eyes stung as I opened them to see pale faces pressing closer, their mouths open wide. I reached for the surface, but there was none. Only the river, only the dark. And then I heard my own voice, faint and distant, as if coming from above the waterline. You can't fight it forever. I woke, choking. Salt water poured from my mouth in thick streams, soaking the floor beneath me. The taste was sharp, metallic, almost coppery. I coughed until my throat burned raw, my arms trembling as I tried to push myself upright. But the floor shifted beneath my hands, soft and slick, like wet skin. My stomach churned as I realized I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. The walls around me pulsed faintly with a dim blue glow, veins of light running like rivers beneath their surface. Each beat sent a ripple through the space, as though I were inside the body of something enormous and alive. The air was heavy here, saturated with moisture that clung to my skin and hair. My breaths came shallow and uneven, every inhale dragging liquid into my lungs. I stumbled forward, my bare feet slapping against the damp floor, each step sending shivers up my spine. The faint sound of dripping water echoed all around me. At first it seemed random, until I realized it wasn't. The drips were deliberate, patterned, Morse code. My pulse quickened as I strained to make out the message. One word, repeated endlessly. Stay. A narrow corridor stretched ahead, lined with mirrors that were not mirrors at all. Their surfaces rippled like disturbed water, and within them I saw myself, or versions of myself. Some were bloated, their skin pale and waxy. Others clawed desperately at invisible surfaces, their mouths open in silent screams. One stood motionless, watching me with hollow black eyes. My stomach turned as it smiled, a smile too wide, too sharp. You've been here before, it whispered, though its mouth didn't move. The words came from everywhere, inside my head and out. I forced my legs to keep moving, though each step felt like wading through molasses. The corridor narrowed, the walls closing in until my shoulders brushed their slick surfaces. Fingers cold and clammy slid out from the walls and trailed across my skin, leaving streaks of icy water in their wake. I bit back a scream, refusing to give them the satisfaction. The air grew thicker, heavier, each breath harder to draw. My ears rang as my chest heaved, the taste of salt flooding my mouth again. Ahead, a faint light flickered, pale and wavering like a candle about to die. I staggered toward it, desperate for something, anything that didn't smell of rot and river mud. As I drew closer, I saw it wasn't a light at all. It was an open door. Beyond it lay a room identical to my own kitchen back home. But this kitchen was wrong. The walls sagged with moisture, the floor warped and swollen from years of water damage. At the table sat 4 figures, their heads bowed, water dripping steadily from their hair onto their plates. The smell hit me then, stagnant, foul, like something drowned and left to rot. One figure raised its head slowly, and I froze as I saw its face. My face bloated and pale, its eyes black pools that stared straight through me. Its mouth moved in a grotesque imitation of speech, but no sound came. Instead, water gushed from its lips, spilling across the table and pooling on the floor. The other figures followed suit, raising their heads in perfect unison. All of them were me. All of them spoke without sound, and yet I heard the words perfectly in my mind. "This is where you belong." The water rose faster now, swirling around my ankles, then my knees. I turned to run, but the corridor behind me had vanished. Only water remained, stretching endlessly in all directions. The walls dissolved, the ceiling peeled away, and suddenly I was floating again, the current dragging me down into cold, endless black. I clawed at nothing, my lungs filling with freezing water. The whispers came again, louder this time, overlapping voices all speaking at once. "You saved him. Now we save you." The river wasn't cold this time. It was warm, sickly warm, like bathwater left standing too long, heavy with the scent of decay. I drifted through it, weightless and unmoored. My arms stretched out to either side, as though surrendering. Faces floated past me in the murk. Blank, pale ovals with mouths agape, bubbles slipping from their blue lips. They didn't look at me. They didn't need to. I could feel their awareness, the quiet condemnation that seeped into my bones. "You saved him, and now we're here," a voice murmured from below. My eyes darted downward, but there was only endless blackness. Something brushed my foot. I recoiled, kicking violently, but the current caught my ankle with sudden force. A hand, bloated, wrinkled, waterlogged, tightened its grip, pulling. I thrashed, my lungs already aching for air, though I hadn't taken a breath since I fell in. Another hand joined the first, then another. Soon dozens of fingers clawed up my legs, scraping at my skin with nails soft and peeling. They didn't pull me down. They held me in place, trapped, as if waiting for something. The voice spoke again, louder now, almost gentle. "Listen." At first I thought it was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. But no, it was knocking, slow, rhythmic, deliberate. The sound carried through the water, as if the river itself was hollow, echoing like a great drum. Knock, knock. Each impact sent vibrations through my ribs, my teeth, the very air in my lungs. I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside me. Each knock perfectly timed with my own pulse. "You feel it, don't you?" whispered the river. "The knocking isn't at your door. It's at your heart." My scream came out as a torrent of bubbles. My chest convulsed as I fought to breathe, fought to surface, but the hands held firm. I flailed uselessly in their grip, the water thickening like syrup, clinging to my hair and limbs. My vision blurred at the edges, a halo of black closing in, when suddenly the knocking stopped. The silence hit harder than the sound had, pressing into my skull until I thought it would crack. The hands released me all at once, and I shot upward through the water, gasping as my head broke the surface. I stood in my living room again, or what looked like it. The walls bowed inward as if the house were being crushed by some enormous weight. Water streamed down in rivulets from the ceiling, pooling around my feet. My breath came ragged and wet, each inhale whistling through a throat raw with salt. I took a step forward, and the floor groaned beneath me, not wood, but flesh. It pulsed faintly with every step, and the sound returned, faint but unmistakable. Knock, knock, knock. The front door stood ajar. Beyond it, the world had dissolved into darkness, but a faint glow rippled across the surface of an unseen river. I didn't move toward it. I couldn't. My feet remained rooted in place, as the knocking grew louder, faster, pounding through the house in erratic rhythms. I clutched my chest, wincing as each knock sent a sharp pain through my ribs. "They're here," the river whispered inside my head. "They've found you." The man appeared again, soaked, shaking, his eyes black pits that reflected nothing. He raised a hand, not toward me, but toward the door. "It's too late to lock them out," he said softly. "They're already inside." The knocking stopped abruptly. The silence that followed felt like a held breath. And then a single whisper, barely audible, slithered through the room. "Sink." The house groaned like an old ship, every wall flexing and sighing under an unseen pressure. I stood motionless, the water swirling at my ankles, its surface rippling with faint, ghostly images, faces, hands, memories. My own reflection stared back up at me, but it didn't match my movements. Its chest rose and fell too quickly, its lips twitching in a silent, frantic chant. "Sink, sink, sink." I stumbled backward, my heel catching on the warped floorboards, and I fell hard. The water splashed up around me, cold at first, then warm as it soaked through my clothes. It felt wrong, thicker than water, sticky and heavy like oil. The man from the river was closer now. I could hear his bare feet slapping wetly against the boards as he moved, but I didn't dare look up. Every instinct in my body screamed at me not to meet his gaze. A hand, wet and clammy, brushed against my hair, curling a strand around its finger. The voice returned, not in my ears but in my veins, pulsing with each beat of my heart. "The river has always been inside you. You only needed to remember." I gasped as a sudden pressure built in my chest. My hands flew to my ribs, fingers splayed across skin that now felt alien, soft, almost gelatinous. Beneath my palms, something shifted, moved. I staggered to my feet, clutching at myself as the sensation grew stronger. It was like tiny currents were running just beneath the surface of my skin, swirling faster and faster. My reflection in the water grinned, black water leaking from its eyes. "Do you feel it?" it whispered. "The current beneath your skin?" The knocking returned, louder than ever, not from the walls this time, but from inside my own body. My ribcage vibrated with each thunderous pound. Knock, knock. My knees buckled as the sound resonated through my skull, drowning out all thought. My hands clawed at my chest, desperate to tear out whatever had taken root inside me. But the voice only laughed, deep and wet. "You can't fight the river. It flows where it wants. Suddenly, I was no longer in the house. I stood ankle deep in the river itself, its black surface stretching endlessly in all directions. The sky above was colorless, a swirling void that pulsed with faint light. All around me, figures stood half submerged, their pale faces turned upward in silent reverence. Their eyes were hollow, their mouths open wide as water streamed endlessly from their lips. The man stood among them, his black eyes locking onto mine. He raised an arm, and the others followed, pointing in perfect unison at my chest. "You brought us back," they said as one. "Now we bring you home." The current surged, swirling around my legs, pulling at my clothes, my skin. I fought to stay upright, but the water rose too fast. It reached my waist, my chest, my neck. I tilted my head back, gasping for air as cold hands gripped my ankles and dragged me under. The river's roar filled my ears, and still I heard the knocking, relentless pounding like war drums from inside my own heart. And then silence. I opened my eyes to find myself staring up at the ceiling of my bedroom. But it wasn't my bedroom anymore. The walls wept black water. The bed sagged with rot. My reflection stood at the foot of the bed, its black eyes wide and unblinking. It opened its mouth, and the voice of the river poured out, "You're ready to sink now." And that's where we leave it, for now. But the story doesn't end here. What waits beyond the river? What happens when the knocking stops? Or worse, when it finally answers back? If you felt the chill in this tale, imagine what's still to come. So don't let go just yet. Hit that subscribe button and join us for more deep dives into the eerie, the emotional, and the unforgettable. There's a whole world of haunting stories waiting for you. And trust me, you won't want to face them alone.